If you have only been watching television for the last several years, you may be under the impression that the Steiner brothers are just a couple of nice old fellows who ran a Shoney's and are now watching their next generation come through the sport. However, if you have been paying attention for a few years, you have possibly heard a few stories about the real Steiner brothers.
I love them both to death, and we're super friends. But bully-wise, was your Steiner boys. The Steiner brothers, they just every time they came by you, they hit you, or they, put your hand down your neck, and they didn't realize how strong they were, so they were hurting you, But they didn't mean that. They wasn't like bullying. They were just playing, but it was always something. I mean, if I saw them coming, I'd leave the room.
The brothers had a reputation like no other, striking fear into basically everyone, but mostly the enhancement talent of the time who dreaded their name being drawn to face the team. Mick Foley had such an experience.
And I'll admit, when I walked into Center Stage Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, I was under the assumption that I was in line for some type of promotional push from the company. So imagine my surprise, even my horror, when I looked at the chalkboard that listed that evening's events and saw my name along with a partner known as Rick Fargo, not exactly a household name, set to do battle with the Steiner brothers. Rick and Scott Steiner were like animals, and I momentarily contemplated quitting the wrestling business. I could feel my heart sinking in my stomach. And this was a move I would later go on to see 4 or 5 other grown men make when they saw their name on that same chalkboard with a different wrestler, a wrestler named Vader. I'm talking about the Vader, who made grown men look at each other and go, I don't think this business is for me, Joey. And I would watch, being an observer of people, I would watch out the tiny window at Center Stage Theaters. They took that long, lonely walk across Peachtree Street, their gears slung over their shoulder in the days before rolling bags. It's a long time ago, never to be seen or heard from again. And that's the type of decision, a career-making decision I was on the precipice of making when I heard the voice of one of my saving graces in that room. I was so lucky, fortunate to have 2 saving graces in that room on that night, the first of which belonged to Kevin Sullivan, a member of WCW's booking committee, one of the greatest minds this business has ever known. And I just heard that voice. He said, brother, what's your finish? Now, finish is wrestle speak for finishing move or finishing hold. I just seen my name on the chalkboard against the Steiners. I was under the impression there would be no offensive moves for Mrs. Foley's baby boy, let alone one so impressive it put an end to Rick or Scott Steiner. So without thinking about it, I just kind of blurted out, I drop an elbow? And he looked at me in disbelief. He said, an elbow for your finish? Should be pointed out without further explanation. An elbow drop for a finishing move sounds rather weak, benign, borderline Hogan-esque. During the course of that match, true to Kevin Sullivan's words, Rick and Scott Steiner could have been a little bit nicer to me. They were pretty tough on Mrs. Foley's baby boy. No offensive moves.
Foley escaped the wrath of the brothers that night, but many were not so lucky.
What had happened is that I didn't know this. He later told me, because I was like, bro, why were you being so stiff? And this is true. If you watch a match, you can see it is true. Shane Douglas is supposed to do a run-in, and for some reason he came out late, and so Rick, just kept hitting me. I actually thought he might be stiffing him, and I actually asked him as a shoot. I said, because me and Bischoff had some heat back then too, and Bischoff had also made a comment once to me and Billy Kidman. In the time I was so mad at you guys, you know, I was thinking of having some people just throw you into a room and turn off the lights and beat the shit out of you. And I was like, God damn. When Bischoff told me that, in the back of my mind, I was now thinking all the time, fuck, this guy might ambush me one day or some shit. In the back of my mind, I just thought Eric was behind him, and I go, did Eric tell you to do that to me? He goes, no, bro. And if he did, I wouldn't have done it. He goes, we don't have no heat. So as far as I'm concerned, we didn't have any heat, because before that, me and Rick had never had words, never had nothing.
Rick had a long-running reputation of simply beating up whoever he wanted to in the ring if he felt things were not to his liking in any given match. Similar to how people view Haku today, Rick Steiner was seen through the 80s and early 90s. He was simply never to be messed with, and unlike the Tongan he was compared to, Rick would often take many liberties with his opponents. And unfortunately, far more than the beatings in the ring.
Would you consider being taped to a table and having a pencil stuck up your ass?
I call it a Thursday night, but
I call it. One time this thing goes down and fucking Robbie sticks a pencil up this fucking guy's ass, and I looked at him. I said, "Do you know that's a felony? That's sodomy." I said, "I'm walking out of here because I don't want to be in a deposition."
now who would this be? I know, just another wrestler, a job guy, or Mel Phillips. Who?
Fucking, it could be anybody. It could be a top guy. I've seen fucking Lex walk into Augusta TV all fucking jacked with cowboy boots, and fucking Steiner walk behind him and kick his feet together. Or fucking watch Lex do a fucking back, and nobody would fight him.
Right.
You know? I mean, nobody would fight Robbie, and Robbie was the crazy one.
Did you ever find anybody duct taped to a bench or anything of that persuasion where the Steiners caught them up?
I personally watched them do that to Disco. They duct taped him what's it called when your legs are back and your feet are back and they're tied?
Oh, like hog-tied.
Like hog-tied, exactly. And they were trying to shove a Sharpie up his, you know what? And I was just new on the scene, and I just remember reaching down as cool and calm as I could. I ended up in the A locker room like by accident, and I got my bags and just eased out the door. So I realized I was next, you know.
Did I take it Disco? Did Disco get away unviolated, or did you not stick around to see the ending?
He didn't get violated, but it was pretty rough.
Rick Steiner's reputation was far from that of a good dude, and that would follow him into the new millennium. Still beating up guys on even indie shows once WCW had closed. He continued to be known as the guy you didn't mess with until one day he came across a young fellow in Florida. Vordell Walker is a name most wouldn't know, but to those who do, he is one of the most heralded names of the early 2000s indie scene. He had standout matches against many future stars and seemed primed to be one himself. He was part of the crop of guys keeping the indie scene alive during a time where it was struggling and a big break seemed right around the corner. All of that would change after taking a booking for a tag team match where across the ring would be Rick Steiner and Dustin Rhodes.
So many years ago, this is going back probably 12 or 13 years, like 2005, I think this was. At an indie show, this guy, who on the indie scene, his name is Vordell Walker. Vordell Walker was tagging with Dustin Rhodes, and he teamed up with Walker, and on the opposite side of the ring, it was Rick Steiner and another independent wrestler whose name escapes me. Well, Steiner had a reputation for being a bit of a bully to some people and taking liberties with people, which is not a hard leap to make when you think of those old Steiner Brothers squashes back in the day and how they just fucking brutalized some of those guys. Well, on this night, he had a bee in his bonnet, I guess, and right out of the gate, he was throwing some legit kicks at Vordell Walker. He busted his mouth open. He was kicking the shit out of this guy. Walker, though, instead of just taking it, he gave it right back to him. He threw a bunch of shoot kicks. He took him down. And Steiner was stunned because he probably figured, holy shit, this kid's fighting back. He didn't expect that. Walker stood up to him. He wasn't going to take any of his shit. And it turned into sort of a famous story. Then there was a backstage confrontation, but this guy would not stand down. So when you mention the name Vordell Walker or type it in, you get a lot of those stories about the incident with Rick Steiner, and this guy is probably not somebody that you want to be messing around with.
The confrontation had been lost media for almost 20 years, until recently, and though many tried to downplay Walker's acumen within the industry who were close to Steiner, most infamously Raven trying to say it was all exaggerated for a large portion of one of his interviews, the footage clearly shows a man finally being served his humble pie. My personal favorite part of the entire thing is at the end when Rick is seen trying to go after Walker but is too beat to do anything, and Walker just yelling at Steiner how foolish his actions were until Rick is dragged off by Dustin Rhodes.
Go back, go back. That's fucked up. That's fucked up. Fuck.
Though he would get a chance in to do some work for NXT, Vordell's day on the big stage hasn't come yet. Many attribute it to the old-timers of the day being put off by what he did to Steiner and bad-mouthing him, but you can never be sure. Please go check out the original video linked below, as Crusher Bones, finding this piece of wrestling history, has answered some of the most long-running questions in shoot wrestling history and contributed a great deal. However, one thing you can be sure of is that Vordell is still out there today, and he doesn't seem to have aged one bit. Perhaps his day is still on the horizon. If that doesn't come to pass, at least you now are one of those who know the legend of Vordell Walker.